The unthinkable escape for 13 years. She had been trapped in the dark and cold cells of the alien Baron's fortress. The walls were thick, the air was stale, and every day felt like a repeat of the last. Her body had become weak, her spirit had been broken, but the fire inside her never fully extinguished. She had learned to survive, to endure, to wait for a chance. And now that chance had finally arrived. Her name was Lyra, and tonight she would escape. The Baron's fortress was a massive structure, surrounded by high walls, armed guards, and locked gates. It was a prison, but it was also a palace. Lyra had been one of the Baron's most valuable guests, a source of entertainment and labor for him. He had taken everything from her, her freedom, her family, and her hope. But what he couldn't take was her will to escape. And tonight, it was all coming together. The storm outside was fierce, the winds howling like hungry beasts, drowning out the sounds of footsteps. It was the perfect cover. Lyra had spent weeks planning, waiting for the perfect moment. She had been watching the guards, studying their routines, learning their weak spots. She had memorized every hallway, every door, and every vent. Tonight, it would all pay off. As the storm raged, Lyra quietly unlatched the small door in the corner of her cell. It was a vent she had managed to loosen over the past few months, hidden behind a piece of rusted metal. With trembling hands, she pulled it open and slipped through. The air was thick with the smell of dampness and dust, but it didn't matter. She was free from her cell. Her heart raced in her chest as she crawled through the narrow vents. The noise of the storm outside mixing with the sounds of her breath. She had never felt so alive. Each moment was a gamble, each turn in the vent a step closer to freedom or capture. She reached the maintenance hallway and crawled out of the vent. The lights in the corridor flickered, casting shadows that danced along the walls. She had memorized the layout of the place, but it still felt like she was walking through a nightmare. The fortress was like a labyrinth, twisting and turning in every direction. She had to stay focused, keep moving, and not get caught. The first guard came into view. He was walking the usual patrol route, his heavy boots clanking against the cold floor. Lyra pressed herself against the wall, her breath held in her chest. She could hear his voice, talking into his communicator, completely unaware of her presence. As he passed, she took a deep breath and silently crept behind him, staying close to the shadows. Her heart was pounding in her chest, but she kept moving, one step at a time, as quietly as she could. She couldn't afford to make any noise. If the Baron found out she was trying to escape, he would punish her in ways that would break her forever. The hallway stretched ahead, and Lyra's mind raced. She had to reach the main gate, where the transport ships were waiting. It was the only way out. But the closer she got to the gate, the more guards she would have to avoid. She had to be careful. She turned the corner and stopped dead in her tracks. There, standing in the middle of the hallway, was a second guard. His back was to her, but it didn't matter. He could turn around at any moment. Lyra's mind raced. She needed to move quickly, or she would be caught. A plan formed in her mind. She spotted a crate near the door. If she could get to it and use it to hide, she might be able to wait until he left. The seconds felt like hours as she crept forward. Step by step, she couldn't afford to make a sound. Her breath felt loud in her ears. Finally, she reached the crate. She ducked behind it, holding her breath, her whole body tense. She could hear the guard's boots moving closer. She was so close to being caught. But then, a loud crash echoed down the hallway. The guard spun around, startled by the noise. Lyra seized the opportunity. Without thinking, she bolted toward the nearest door, pushing it open with all her strength. The sound of her footsteps echoed through the halls, but she didn't care. She had to move. She sprinted through the darkened hallways, her legs burning with exhaustion, but she couldn't stop. Not now. Not when freedom was so close. She rounded another corner and found herself at the door to the outside. The storm outside was violent, but it was her chance. She grabbed the door handle, her hands shaking, and pulled. The door creaked open, revealing the darkness of the storm beyond. For the first time in years, Lyra felt hope surge through her. She was free. She was outside, but the storm was brutal, the wind biting at her skin, the rain blurring her vision. She didn't know where to go, but she knew she couldn't stop. The Baron's forces would be looking for her soon. They would never stop until they caught her again. Lyra didn't look back as she ran, her heart pounding in her chest. The escape was only the beginning. Now she had to survive. And for the first time in years, she felt the freedom to fight. For her life, the wasteland, the storm outside was her only companion. It howled through the endless barren landscape, whipping Lyra's clothes and cutting at her skin. The cold felt like 1,000 tiny needles piercing her body, but she didn't care. Freedom was within reach. For the first time in years, she was alive, truly alive, and no one could take that from her. Lyra pushed forward, stumbling over the rocky ground, her muscles aching, her breath sharp in the cold air. She had no idea where she was going, but she had to keep moving. The Baron's fortress was behind her now, but the horrors of her captivity would never be left behind completely. They would always haunt her. She had spent 13 long years in that place, and the thought of it still clung to her like a shadow. Her mind raced as she walked, her thoughts spinning in a whirlwind. How far had she run? How much time did she have before the Baron's forces sent out the search parties? They would track her down. Of that she was certain. The Baron wasn't one to let his property slip away so easily. Ahead, the ground seemed to stretch out endlessly, the horizon a distant line that blurred in the rain. The barren wasteland was unlike anything she had ever seen. It wasn't the harsh desert-like places she had read about in the few old books she had been allowed to keep in the prison. It wasn't a place of life or death. It was just nothing. The land was empty, devoid of warmth or any signs of life. Lyra's feet dragged as exhaustion set in. Her body, weak from years of malnutrition and abuse, felt as if it could collapse at any moment. She had barely any food, and her water supply had long since run dry. Her only hope was to find a settlement, something before she collapsed. She tried to push the thought away, but fear crept in. The longer she ran, the more she realized that the wilderness was as much a threat as the Baron. The planet was hostile, the storm violent, and the isolation was suffocating. But she had no choice. She had to keep going. Her steps slowed as a soft, low sound reached her ears. At first, she thought it was just the storm, but no, it was something else. A hum, faint and distant, like the sound of machinery. Hope flickered inside her chest. Maybe there was something or someone out there, and they could help her. She wasn't alone. Lyra squinted against the rain, straining to see through the dark fog that clung to the land. The sound was getting louder. She followed it, her pace quickening despite the exhaustion. The hum turned into the roar of engines. Someone was out here, and they had a vehicle. Her heart raced, a new surge of adrenaline shooting through her. She pushed herself harder, faster, until she could finally make out the shape of a vehicle, a transport craft of some kind. The vehicle was sleek, built for speed, and it was moving fast, cutting through the storm like a blade. But it wasn't a military craft, not like the ones the Baron used. It was a civilian transport, possibly a scavenger or someone from a faraway settlement. Lyra's hope surged, but then doubt struck her like a cold wave. Who were these people? Would they help her? Or would they just turn her in for a bounty? She knew how dangerous the universe could be for someone like her, someone with no past, no future, and no worth in the eyes of most. But she couldn't let fear control her now. She had nothing left to lose. As the transport came closer, Lyra took a deep breath and, despite her shaking legs, stepped out into the open. She raised her hands slightly, hoping to signal them without seeming threatening. Her body screamed with exhaustion, but her eyes never left the craft. The transport slowed and stopped. A figure stepped out from the cockpit, a tall silhouette, against the backdrop of the storm. Lyra's heart skipped a beat. The figure was a man, but he was different from the soldiers she had seen. He didn't carry weapons or wear the uniform of a soldier. Instead, he looked worn, weathered, like someone who had seen too many battles and lost too much. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes held a hint of something else, a recognition. He saw her, really saw her, and for a moment, Lyra thought that maybe, just maybe, this could be her chance. She took a step forward, and the man spoke, his voice low and gravelly, almost drowned out by the storm. "You're running from something," he said, his tone flat but not unkind. "What is it? Who's chasing you?" Lyra swallowed, her voice barely above a whisper. "The Baron. I escaped. He'll come for me." The man's eyes darkened, and his posture stiffened. He didn't speak for a moment, his gaze shifting to the endless wasteland that stretched out before them. "Get in," he finally said, his voice hardening with a determination that sent a ripple of warmth through her chest. "We'll figure out the rest later." Lyra didn't hesitate. She climbed into the transport, feeling the warmth of the vehicle against her cold skin. The doors closed behind her, sealing her inside with this stranger as the vehicle roared to life and the storm faded into the distance. Lyra let herself close her eyes, just for a moment. She had escaped the prison, but the journey was far from over. The Baron would not give up easily, and she knew that danger still loomed around every corner. But for the first time in years, she allowed herself to believe in the possibility of a future. With the man beside her, the road ahead seemed just a little less uncertain. A stranger's protection. The transport hummed steadily through the storm, its engine cutting through the heavy winds like a beast on a hunt. Lyra sat in silence, her eyes glued to the small window beside her. The swirling storm outside was still fierce, but within the transport, it was warm and safe. For the first time in years, she could breathe deeply without the ever-present weight of fear pressing down on her chest. The man at the controls never once looked at her, his focus entirely on the dark road ahead. His features were hardened, his skin tanned from years of exposure to the elements. There was a certain strength about him, a silent authority, and though he didn't speak much, Lyra felt that she could trust him. His name was Marcus, but she knew little else about him. He had rescued her from the storm, yet there was something about him that made her wonder. Why had he stopped to help her? She was nothing more than a fugitive, a runaway, with no past and no future. People like her were rarely given a second glance, much less the chance of survival. But here she was, in this stranger's transport, racing away from the Baron's grasp, with nothing but the hope that Marcus could help her escape the hell she had lived through. "What happens now?" Lyra finally asked, breaking the heavy silence. Her voice was tentative, unsure if she should push for answers. She hadn't spoken to anyone for so long, and she wasn't sure if she even knew how to anymore. Marcus didn't look up at her, his hands steady on the controls as he guided the transport through the storm. "Now, we get as far from the Baron as possible." His tone was clipped, matter-of-fact, as though he had been in this situation 100 times before. Lyra couldn't help but wonder how many others had begged for his help in their time of need, how many had been turned away. She could sense that there was more to Marcus than just this quiet, rugged exterior. He was a man who had seen things. Dangerous things. The storm outside began to subside, the rain letting up, though the wind still howled. The darkness that had surrounded them slowly lifted, replaced by the dull glow of stars, piercing through the thinning clouds. Lyra watched as the landscape changed. The barren wasteland, with its desolate, empty stretch of land, gave way to jagged mountain peaks. The air seemed thinner here, colder, but still it was a welcome change. The world she had known for so long, the prison, the torment seemed far away now, but it didn't feel like an escape. It felt like a temporary respite, a fleeting moment before everything would inevitably come crashing down again. She knew the Baron would send out every tracker, every bounty hunter. He would stop at nothing to find her. "You've been running from the Baron for a long time, haven't you?" Marcus asked suddenly, his voice breaking through her spiraling thoughts. Lyra nodded slowly. 13 years. The word hung in the air, a truth that she had carried for so long, and yet had never been able to say out loud. 13 years of torment, of endless cruelty. 13 years of not knowing if she would ever be free, of wondering if she would even survive another day. Marcus didn't say anything for a long time, but Lyra could feel his eyes on her now. "You're not alone in this," he said quietly. "Not anymore." The words were simple, but they carried a weight that Lyra hadn't expected. It had been so long since anyone had said something like that to her. It had been so long since anyone had offered her any sort of comfort. The reality of it settled in slowly, like the warmth from the transport's cabin creeping into her frozen bones. She looked at him, but he was already focused back on the road. His hands gripped the steering controls with a quiet determination, his expression unreadable. There was a certain sadness in his posture, a shadow behind his actions. Lyra wondered if she would ever know what had driven him to this life, what had made him so hard, so cautious. But for now, she didn't press him for answers. Instead, she leaned back in her seat, closing her eyes, and let herself feel the steady hum of the transport. There was something almost comforting about it, something that whispered of safety. It was strange, but for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to imagine that maybe, just maybe, there was a future beyond the nightmare she had escaped from. The transport continued its journey, winding its way through the mountains, through the night. They passed through a valley, and Lyra's breath caught in her throat as she saw a flicker of light in the distance. It was faint at first, barely visible, but as they drew closer, she could see a small settlement. There were buildings clustered together, their outlines sharp against the night sky. The first sign of civilization she had seen in days. "Where are we?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "This is my place," Marcus replied, his tone flat. "We'll stop here. For the night, it's safer." Lyra didn't ask any more questions. She knew better than to press. It was his choice to help her, and for now, it was enough. As they pulled into the settlement, Lyra felt a strange mix of emotions. Part of her was relieved, grateful, but another part of her was cautious. They weren't safe yet. The Baron's reach was long, and she had a feeling it wouldn't be long before his forces began closing in. But for the moment, they were safe. She could rest. She could breathe. And for the first time in years, she allowed herself to believe that freedom might actually be possible. Asterisk the price of safety. The transport came to a slow stop at the edge of the settlement, and Lyra's eyes scanned the area as they parked. The settlement was small, tucked away in a valley between two jagged mountains, surrounded by tall, protective walls made of weathered stone and metal. The soft, flickering glow of lanterns illuminated the area, casting long shadows across the narrow dirt paths. The air was crisp, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Lyra breathed without the taste of fear in her throat. Marcus turned off the transport's engine and gave her a quick glance. Stay low. Stay quiet. This isn't a place for tourists." Lyra nodded, but the caution in his voice sent a ripple of unease through her. Was this truly a safe haven, or just another temporary stop in her long flight from the Baron's wrath? The door slid open with a soft hiss, and they both stepped out. The cold air bit into her skin, but it felt refreshing, almost freeing. The settlement was quiet, its inhabitants moving in and out of their small homes, most of them keeping their heads down, as if they were used to living in the shadows. Lyra followed Marcus closely, keeping her steps light, though her heart was pounding in her chest. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Even in this remote place, she knew the eyes of the universe would find her sooner or later. The Baron's empire stretched farther than she had ever imagined, and his reach was endless. Marcus led her down a narrow alleyway that was barely wide enough for the transport, passing through a set of iron gates that creaked open at his touch. He didn't look at her as they walked, his face set in a grim expression. The silence between them felt heavy, filled with unsaid things that Lyra couldn't bring herself to ask. They arrived at a small, unremarkable building at the edge of the settlement. The walls were made of mud and stone, its roof sagging under the weight of time. Marcus didn't hesitate as he pushed open the creaky door. It swung inward with a groan, revealing a dimly lit room with a few scattered chairs and a small table. The air inside was stale but warmer than the outside. "Here," Marcus said quietly, stepping inside. "This is where we'll stay for the night." Lyra stepped in behind him, cautiously glancing around. There was nothing welcoming about the place, no soft bedding, no warmth. It was bare, functional, and the kind of place she had become used to. The walls were bare, except for a few old maps, faded and tattered. A single lamp flickered weakly in the corner, casting shadows across the room. Marcus took a seat at the table and gestured for Lyra to sit as well. She hesitated for a moment before doing so, unsure of what to say or how to act. She was safe for now, but something gnawed at her insides. The Baron was not one to let his prey go without a fight. He would come for her with everything he had. He would send his soldiers, his trackers, his mercenaries, and she would have nowhere left to run. "Why are you helping me?" Lyra finally asked the question that had been lingering in her mind since she first met him. "You don't even know me." Marcus looked up, his gaze hardening, but there was something else in his eyes, something more than just the hardened exterior of a man who had seen too many battles. There was a flicker of something human. "I've been where you are," he said quietly, his voice rough. "I've run from my own demons. I know what it's like to have no one, to trust no one, to be alone." Lyra stayed silent, studying him. She could sense the weight of his words. He wasn't just helping her out. Of some sense of duty or kindness, he understood what it meant to be hunted, to live with the constant fear of being caught. "So, what happens now?" Lyra asked, her voice trembling slightly. "The Baron will find me. He always does. He'll stop at nothing to get me back. What can we do?" Marcus stood, his back to her, staring out through a small window at the darkened world outside. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then he spoke. "We fight." Lyra blinked, unsure if she had heard him correctly. "Fight? How can we fight him? We're outnumbered, outgunned. You've seen his forces. They'll destroy us." Marcus turned slowly, his face grim but resolute. "I know how to strike back. I know the Baron's weakness." Lyra's heart skipped a beat. "His weakness?" He nodded. "The Baron's empire isn't as strong as it looks. He's built it on fear and control. But fear can be broken, and control can be shattered. If we move fast enough, we can hit him where it hurts. We find his supply lines, his hidden bases, his allies. We take them out one by one. The Baron's power isn't infinite. But we have to act now, before he sends everything he has after us." Lyra swallowed, her mind spinning. The idea of fighting the Baron's empire seemed impossible. But as she looked at Marcus, this man who had lived through his own battles, who had survived the worst and still stood strong, she realized something. She was no longer alone. And for the first time, she felt the faintest stirrings of hope. "Are you sure about this?" she asked, her voice steady but filled with uncertainty. Marcus met her gaze, his eyes burning with a fierce intensity. "We don't have a choice. If we don't fight, we'll die running." Lyra's mind raced. She had spent so long hiding, so long running from her past, that the idea of fighting back seemed foreign, impossible. But the reality of her situation was clear. There was no safe place, no escape. The Baron would find her. But maybe, just maybe, she could be the one to bring him down. And as the first rays of dawn began to break through the cracks in the walls, Lyra made a decision. She was no longer a victim. She was a fighter. And she would fight until the end. Asterisk turning the tables. The days blurred into one another. A haze of preparation, tension, and constant movement. Lyra had never known anything like it, this relentless need to stay ahead, to plan each step carefully, knowing that one wrong move could cost her everything. But she was learning quickly. Marcus had taught her much in their time together, from the harsh realities of combat to the strategy behind taking down a powerful enemy like the Baron. A man was not just a survivor, he was a strategist. And his knowledge of the Baron's empire was invaluable. They had already moved several times, staying just one step ahead of the Baron's hunters. The Baron's forces were vast, and Marcus knew they wouldn't stop until they found them. The quiet, remote settlement where they had first taken refuge no longer felt safe. It was only a matter of time before the Baron's spies sniffed them out, and when that happened, the settlement would pay the price. "Time to go," Marcus said one evening, his voice calm but urgent. "We move tonight." Lyra, sitting by the small, dim light in the corner of the room, looked up. She had been going over the plans in her head, memorizing every detail Marcus had shared with her. Every move had to be precise. The Baron's empire ran on fear and control, but it was also incredibly fragile. There were cracks in the system, weaknesses that Lyra had learned to exploit. The Baron wasn't infallible. She had seen it firsthand. "I'm ready," she said, her voice stronger now than it had been days before. She had learned to hide. The fear that had once paralyzed her, it was still there, lurking beneath the surface, but she had a new determination. She wasn't just running anymore, she was fighting back. Marcus nodded, the faintest trace of approval in his eyes. "We're going after one of his supply bases tonight. It's small, but it's a vital link. If we take it down, we'll send a message. The Baron will know we're not just running anymore." Lyra felt a surge of adrenaline. They weren't just escaping, they were striking back, showing the Baron that he couldn't control everything. The thought was terrifying, but exhilarating. For so long, she had been the helpless one, the one cowering in fear. But now, with Marcus by her side, she had become something else, a force to be reckoned with. As they gathered their gear, the weight of the situation settled in. It was one thing to talk about fighting back, to plan it out in the safety of their hideout. But it was another thing entirely to actually carry it out. This mission would be dangerous. They would be outnumbered, outgunned, and their chances of success were slim. But they couldn't afford to fail. The transport hummed to life as they climbed aboard, its engines purring quietly as it cut through the night. They flew low, staying beneath the radar, moving as swiftly and quietly as possible. The storm clouds from earlier had cleared, but the air was thick with the promise of violence. The galaxy had always been a place of chaos, and tonight It felt like the calm before the storm. The target was a small, remote outpost hidden in a rocky canyon, far from the main military bases of the Baron's empire. It was the perfect place to strike isolated and defenseless. But it was also a place where the Baron stored his most valuable resources, supplies that could turn the tide in his favor. Taking it out wouldn't just send a message. It would cripple his operations for months as they approached the canyon. The transport systems flickered, and Marcus's fingers danced across the controls. He was a master of navigation, keeping them in the shadows, avoiding detection at all costs. The base loomed ahead, a collection of crude buildings and storage containers nestled within the rocks. Lyra felt her heart hammer in her chest. This was real. This was happening. We'll hit them hard and fast, Marcus said, his voice low, focused. Get in, get out, and don't waste time. We need to leave before the reinforcements arrive. Lyra nodded, her jaw tight. They had no room for mistakes. Every second mattered. They landed silently, their transport disappearing into the dark shadows of the canyon as they made their way toward the base. Lyra's boots crunched softly against the dry ground as they crept forward. Marcus led the way, moving like a shadow, his steps purposeful and confident. They were a team now, and Lyra could feel the bond between them strengthen with every move they made. They reached the outskirts of the base without incident. There were 2 guards at the entrance, talking quietly to one another, oblivious to the danger lurking just beyond their sight. Lyra's pulse quickened, but she steadied herself. This was it. No turning back now. Marcus gestured to her, a silent signal. She nodded, her hand tightening around the blaster she had taken from one of the guards during their last skirmish. She was no longer the scared, helpless woman she had once been. She was ready to fight, ready to strike in a blur of motion. Marcus took the first guard down with a swift, precise strike. Lyra followed his lead, moving like a whisper through the night, taking down the second guard before he could even react. The quiet efficiency of their movements was almost unnerving, but it was exactly what they needed. They were in. The base was small, but heavily guarded. The walls were lined with crates of supplies, ammunition, food, fuel, everything the Baron needed to maintain his control over the galaxy. But none of it mattered if they could destroy it. Marcus planted the charges with quick precision, and Lyra kept watch. They had no time to waste. As the countdown began, the hum of the explosives grew louder, the tension in the air thick with anticipation. 5 seconds, Marcus said, his voice calm. Lyra's heart raced. This was it. They would either succeed or they would die trying. The explosion rocked the base, sending shockwaves through the canyon. The sound of metal twisting and crashing echoed in the night air, and Lyra felt the heat from the blast on her face. They had done it, but the mission wasn't over yet. The Baron's reinforcements were on their way, and they had no time to waste. Move! Marcus shouted, his voice sharp. They ran, their footsteps pounding the ground as they sprinted toward the transport. The canyon walls echoed with the sounds of the blast, and the alarms from the base blared into the night. They didn't stop until they were safely inside the transport, and even then, Marcus didn't hesitate. He gunned the engines, sending them soaring back into the sky, away from the chaos they had just created. For the first time, Lyra felt something she hadn't in years' power. The Baron had underestimated her, and now she had sent him a message he wouldn't forget. Asterisk. A new beginning. The explosion had been a resounding success. As the transport soared away from the wreckage, Lyra allowed herself a brief moment of satisfaction, watching the fireball flicker in the distance, a fiery beacon marking the first true strike against the Baron's empire. But the fleeting sense of triumph quickly faded as the reality of what they had done set in. They had attacked one of the Baron's supply bases, but this was just the beginning. The danger was far from over as they climbed higher into the atmosphere. The lights of the canyon dimmed, replaced by the cold emptiness of space. Lyra stared out the window, her thoughts racing. She had just helped take down a vital part of the Baron's operation. But what did that mean for her? For Marcus? The Baron's reach extended far and wide, and though they had delivered a blow, they had made themselves a target. Marcus, too, remained silent at the controls, his eyes trained on the stars ahead. Lyra could see the weight of what they'd done. In the set of his jaw, he wasn't just a fighter. He was a man with a plan, and this was only a small part of a much larger fight. The real war was still to come. We hit him where it hurts. Marcus finally spoke, his voice low but firm. But this is just the beginning, Lyra. He'll come after us harder now. We've got to stay ahead of him. Lyra nodded, her chest tight. She wasn't afraid of the Baron. She wasn't afraid of anything anymore. But the thought of what was to come, the months, maybe years, of constant running, took a toll on her spirit. She had seen so many people come and go in her life, always with hope and dreams of freedom. But no one had ever really escaped. They had only survived. And now she was beginning to wonder if that was all she would ever do, survive. But then Marcus spoke again, breaking through her thoughts. "There's a place," he said, his tone softer now, as if testing the waters. "A colony. It's far from here, off the grid. No Baron's forces, no bounty hunters. It's a haven for people like us. We can disappear there, start over, a new beginning." Lyra turned to him, surprised by the shift in his words. "A haven? After everything we've done, you think there's a place where we can escape the Baron's reach?" Marcus didn't answer right away. He seemed to be mulling it over in his mind, trying to decide whether to say more. Finally, he met her gaze, his eyes steady. "Some places are beyond the Baron's control. People who know how to hide. People who have been in the game for a long time. I've been there before. They help people who are lost." Lyra studied his face, searching for any sign of doubt. But there was none. He was certain. This colony, this hidden place, was more than just a rumor. It was a chance. And it was exactly what she needed. "Then let's go," she said, her voice a little more confident than it had been in days. "Let's make this a real escape." Marcus nodded, a small, almost imperceptible smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "It's not going to be easy. We'll need supplies, and we'll need to move fast. The Baron will spare no expense in hunting us down." Lyra's fingers tightened around the seat, her resolve hardening. "I've run from him for too long. I'm done being a fugitive." Marcus glanced at her, his expression shifting to one of understanding. "This isn't just about running anymore, is it?" "No," she replied firmly. "This is about taking back my life. About taking back control." Marcus adjusted their course, a transport gliding smoothly through the stars. They were headed for the colony, but the journey wouldn't be easy. There would be obstacles along the way, enemies, and the ever-present fear of being caught. But for the first time since escaping the Baron's grasp, Lyra felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years' hope. The kind of hope that wasn't fragile or fleeting, but something solid, something worth fighting for. The transport cut through the quiet expanse of space, and the hum of the engines felt almost comforting. They had a long way to go, but Lyra knew that with each passing minute, she was one step closer to freedom, to a new beginning. And then, just as she began to feel a sense of relief, Marcus's voice broke the silence again. "We're not just running away, Lyra," he said quietly, his eyes on the stars ahead. "We're going to build something. Something the Baron can't take from us." Lyra looked at him, the weight of his words sinking in. The Baron had taken so much from her already, her family, her peace, her freedom. But what if there was more to her future than just running. What if she could build something from the ashes of her past? Something the Baron couldn't touch. What do you mean? She asked, the question on the tip of her tongue. Marcus's lips curled into a smile, one filled with purpose. I mean, we're going to fight. We're going to unite people, gather allies, and make sure the Baron knows he's not the only one who can build an empire. Lyra's heart raced with a mix of excitement and uncertainty. This was it, the point of no return. She wasn't just running anymore. She wasn't just surviving. She was going to fight for a future where she could finally be free, where she could live without fear. She took a deep breath, her eyes fixed on the stars outside, and for the first time, she didn't feel like an outlaw. She didn't feel like someone hiding in the shadows. She was a woman with a cause, and nothing would stop her from seeing it through. We'll make it, she said, her voice steady with newfound resolve. Yes, Marcus agreed, his gaze never wavering. Together. As they sped toward their destination, Lyra knew that the road ahead would be hard, fraught with danger and uncertainty. But she also knew this. For the first time, she wasn't alone. And for the first time in a long while, she believed that she might just be able to build the life she had always dreamed of. The life that the Baron could never take from her. Asterisk.